The air in the conference room felt heavy, thick with tension. Our family had gathered for the reading of my father's will, and I couldn't help but notice the nervous energy in the room. My brother, Tom, was seated at the head of the table, his usual confidence on display. But there was something about the way he sat, leaning back in his chair with a smirk on his face, that made my stomach churn. He had always been the golden child, the one my father trusted above all others. I was used to being ignored, to being seen as the lesser sibling, but I never expected this. As Mr. Reeves, our family lawyer, began to read the will, I tried to focus. But my mind kept drifting back to Tom's smug expression. My father had worked so hard to build everything we had, and I couldn't shake the feeling that Tom had a hand in controlling it all. The lawyer read through the first few pages, but when he reached the final section, he paused, his brow furrowing as if he had stumbled upon something he didn't expect. The silence in the room felt suffocating. "There seems to be something missing," Mr. Reeves muttered, flipping through the papers. Tom's face went pale for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. My heart raced. I knew something was wrong. There was another will, a backup one, and I was about to prove it. The room fell silent as the realization hit me like a freight train. My father had made sure I wasn't left in the dust. I wasn't about to let Tom take everything from me. I stood up, my voice steady, but loud enough to break the silence. "There's another will," I said, not caring about the stunned looks from my family. Tom's expression shifted from smug confidence to a barely contained panic. "What do you mean, another will?" Tom demanded, his voice shaking slightly. He was trying to regain control of the situation, but the fear in his eyes was undeniable. Mr. Reeves glanced between the papers in front of him and me, confusion on his face. "Are you sure?" he asked. I nodded, a cold sense of certainty settling over me. "Yes. I'm sure. There's a backup will, and it's been with the family lawyer for years." Tom's face darkened, but his attempts to dismiss my words came off as desperate. "This is nonsense," he muttered, trying to regain his composure. But it was too late. I had just exposed him. The truth was out, and there was no going back. The next day, I met with Mr. Reeves. The small office smelled of old books and polished wood, the faint scent of leather-bound contracts filling the air. As he pulled out the envelope containing the backup will, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. This was it. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The one where the truth would finally come to light. Mr. Reeves handed me the envelope, and I could feel my hands trembling as I opened it. The paper was old, the edges slightly worn, but the signature was unmistakable. My father's handwriting. The backup will. I had never seen it before, but it was exactly what I had expected. "This has been here for years," Mr. Reeves said, his voice quiet but firm. "Your father was always meticulous about his affairs. He knew something like this might happen." I looked down at the document, my heart racing. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of control. The game had changed, and now I was the one holding the cards. This was no longer about money, it was about proving that Tom's betrayal would not go unpunished. I sat at home, the backup will in my hands, reading it over and over again. Each clause, each stipulation, was clear. My father had given me a portion of his estate, something Tom never expected. The will confirmed everything I had suspected about Tom's manipulations. He had assumed that by hiding the real will, he could control everything, our father's legacy, the family business, everything. But he was wrong. My father had anticipated this. He had known Tom's greed would eventually get the best of him. The backup will wasn't just a document, it was my father's final act of trust in me. He had made sure I wouldn't be left with nothing, even when Tom thought he had it all figured out. I could feel the power of the will in my hands. It wasn't just a piece of paper, it was proof. Proof that my father knew who would fight for his legacy, who would honor his wishes. And now, I had to fight. Tom had no idea what was coming. I didn't waste any time. I walked straight into Tom's office, the backup will tucked under my arm. He looked up from his desk, the usual arrogance in his eyes, but when he saw the document, his face shifted. He quickly stood up, trying to maintain his composure, but I could see the tension in his shoulders. "You thought you could take it all, didn't you?" I said, my voice steady, but sharp. I placed the will on his desk, the thud of the paper loud in the silent room. Tom's eyes darted between the document and me. "What is this?" he asked, his voice strained. "It's the real will," I replied calmly. "The one you thought you could hide. The one that makes sure you don't get everything." He tried to brush it off, to dismiss it as a mistake, but I could see the panic creeping into his expression. "This is a forgery," he said, his voice trembling. "This isn't real." "No, Tom," I said quietly. "This is real. And now, you're going to have to answer for what you've done." Tom's first instinct was to deny everything. He tried to convince me that the backup will was a fake, that my father's true intentions were in the first document. But his words were hollow, desperate. His lawyers had been able to manipulate people for years, but they couldn't manipulate the truth. I wasn't going to let him get away with it. "You're lying, Tom," I said, my voice unwavering. "This isn't just about money. This is about what's right. You can't just take what doesn't belong to you." His face twisted with frustration, but I saw the cracks. Tom had always been good at hiding his emotions, but the fear was seeping through now. He knew the truth. The backup will was authentic, and there was nothing he could do to change that. He tried to regain control, but it was too late. The damage had been done. And now, he would face the consequences. The courtroom was packed, and the tension in the air was palpable. Tom had hired a team of lawyers, high-priced, experienced attorneys, but I had something they didn't, the truth. My lawyer, Mr. Reeves, had been with our family for years, and I knew he wouldn't let me down. The first few days of the trial were a blur of legal jargon and cross-examinations. Tom's lawyers tried everything they could to discredit the backup will. They claimed it was outdated, that my father's intentions had changed, that I was merely a disgruntled sibling trying to get a bigger share. But I wasn't backing down. The truth was on my side, and I wasn't going to let Tom's lies stand. Every piece of evidence, every statement from the witnesses, reinforced the authenticity of the backup will. It was clear, Tom's manipulation was crumbling, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. As the days passed, the pressure on Tom intensified. His lawyers couldn't keep up with the mounting evidence against him. They tried to redirect the argument, but it was no use. Every attempt to undermine the backup will only made their case weaker. Tom's once confident demeanor began to fade. I could see the stress in his eyes, the way his hands trembled during his testimony. This wasn't the same man who had walked into the courtroom a few days ago. This was someone who knew his time was running out. I stayed calm, focused on the task at hand. The evidence was clear. Tom had hidden the will, manipulated the truth, and now he was paying the price for it. Absolutely. I'll continue with the detailed expansion of the remaining chapters. Let's keep building the tension and the satisfying resolution for the protagonist's victory and the antagonist's downfall. The family, once united by love and history, was now fractured. It wasn't just a matter of business or money anymore, it was about betrayal. As the trial continued, the rift between me and Tom widened. Some family members took his side, the ones who had always seen him as the rightful heir. Others began to question his actions, torn by the evidence stacking up against him. I overheard my mother speaking to my aunt one afternoon, her voice shaky. "I didn't know Tom could do something like this. It feels like he's not the person I raised." It hurt. I had always admired Tom as my older brother, but now I realized how much I had been blind to. His arrogance and sense of entitlement had clouded my perception for years. But now, the truth was undeniable. The weight of my father's legacy was too heavy for him to bear. I didn't blame my mother for trying to make sense of it all. But I wasn't going to back down. Not for anyone. This was bigger than family loyalty, it was about integrity. And I couldn't let Tom's betrayal destroy everything our father had built. The walls around Tom began to crack. His defenses, once so solid, were beginning to crumble under the weight of the truth. It was a small detail at first, an offhand comment made by one of his lawyers during a routine questioning. They had revealed that they had discussed the will before it had disappeared, a conversation they hadn't been authorized to mention. The courtroom gasped, and I saw Tom's face drain of color. He stood rigid, trying to maintain his composure, but the damage had been done. His own lawyer had unwittingly exposed him. The secret was out, and it could no longer be hidden. It was a pivotal moment in the trial. Every eye in the courtroom was on Tom, and for the first time, I saw the fear in his eyes. He had thought he could control this, but the truth had a way of unraveling even the best-laid plans. I couldn't help but feel a sense of justice as I watched him falter. He had been so sure of himself, so convinced that he could manipulate everything in his favor. But now, the truth was his enemy. The final blow came from an unexpected source, a former family friend, someone who had worked with my father for years. He came forward as a witness, and his testimony was devastating. He confirmed that he had overheard Tom discussing the backup will with one of his lawyers, admitting that it had been intentionally hidden. It was the nail in the coffin. Tom's last-ditch efforts to defend himself crumbled in the face of undeniable evidence. His confidence, once so unshakable, had disappeared completely. He stood in the courtroom, silent, as his lawyer tried to salvage what little was left of their case. I didn't feel any joy in watching his downfall, but I couldn't deny the sense of relief that washed over me. Tom's betrayal had cost him everything. And now, the truth would finally prevail. The verdict day arrived, and the atmosphere in the courtroom was electric. My heart raced as I sat beside Mr. Reeves, my lawyer, waiting for the judge to announce the decision. Tom, who had once been so confident in his victory, sat slumped in his chair, his face pale. He had no more arguments left. The evidence had spoken for itself. When the judge finally spoke, his voice was firm. The backup will is deemed legitimate. The defendant's claims are hereby dismissed. I exhaled slowly, the weight of the moment sinking in. The room was still for a moment, and then the murmur of relief and disbelief spread across the courtroom. Tom's face turned crimson as the realization hit him. He had lost. The game was over. I had won. But more importantly, my father's legacy was intact. The family business was safe, and Tom's manipulation had failed. In the days following the verdict, the atmosphere at home was strained. Tom had disappeared from the family's social circles, no longer attending gatherings or even speaking to anyone. He had retreated into himself, the pride and arrogance that had once defined him now replaced with shame and regret. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. The victory was mine, but it was the quiet satisfaction that felt the most powerful. My father's legacy was secure, and the truth had won. But the aftermath wasn't easy. Family relationships were strained, and I knew it would take time for us to heal. Tom hadn't just lost the case, he had lost the respect of the family. The shame of his actions would follow him for the rest of his life. I had done what needed to be done, and I could finally breathe easy knowing I had protected my father's legacy. With Tom out of the picture, I took over the family business. It wasn't something I had ever anticipated, but now that it was mine, I was determined to honor my father's vision. The company had been built with hard work, dedication, and integrity, and I knew I was capable of carrying it forward. The first few months were challenging. I had to navigate through old business relationships and ensure that the company remained on solid ground. But with every decision I made, I felt more confident. My father's values had shaped my approach, and I was proving that I could lead with the same level of dedication he had. The business was thriving, and I was beginning to earn the respect of the employees and the board. But more than that, I had found my own voice. I wasn't just the daughter of the founder anymore. I was the leader, and I was ready to make my mark. After weeks of silence, Tom finally reached out to me. He called, his voice hesitant, apologizing for everything he had done. It was a hollow apology, but it was the best he could offer. I didn't feel any anger toward him anymore. His actions had already shown me who he truly was, and I didn't need his apology to find closure. I was wrong, he said quietly, I thought I could control everything. I thought I deserved it all. I stayed silent for a moment. You did, I replied. But it doesn't work like that. Not in this family. Not anymore. He let out a long sigh, and I could hear the weight of his regret in his voice. But it didn't matter. What had been broken couldn't be fixed with words. Certainly. I'll now fully expand and detail chapters 16 to 25, focusing on the tension building toward Tom's downfall and the protagonist's victory. These chapters will build upon the emotional payoff and satisfying resolution of the revenge story. In the weeks following the trial, the atmosphere at family gatherings shifted. There was no longer the same tension in the air, but there were also no easy answers. Tom's actions had torn apart the fabric of what used to be a close-knit family, and it would take time for us to find our way back to each other. Tom, for all his bravado and arrogance, was a shadow of his former self. He no longer participated in family events, and when he did show up, his eyes were filled with regret and shame. My mother tried to be the peacemaker, reaching out to him in an effort to mend the broken bonds. But Tom's pride wouldn't let him fully accept the truth of what he had done. I understood my mother's desire to heal the family, but I couldn't let go of the betrayal that had been inflicted on me. I had protected my father's legacy, not just for myself, but for the family as a whole. And as much as I wanted to move forward, I couldn't ignore what had happened. My relationship with Tom had changed forever. Despite the tension, there was a quiet understanding that we couldn't continue down the path of division. Slowly, my mother, aunt, and a few others began to extend olive branches, but it would take time for trust to be rebuilt. The months that followed the trial were challenging, but I could feel the weight lifting from my shoulders. Taking control of the company had been more difficult than I had anticipated, but it was also the most rewarding thing I had ever done. My father's legacy wasn't just about the company, it was about his values, integrity, hard work, and fairness. I threw myself into the business, determined to prove that I could succeed on my own terms. Every decision I made was guided by the principles my father had instilled in me. The first few weeks were rocky, and there were moments when I doubted myself. But I quickly learned that leadership wasn't about making everyone happy, it was about doing what was right. I brought in new faces, formed new partnerships, and solidified relationships with clients who respected the integrity of the company. Slowly but surely, I began to shape the business into something that reflected my own vision, not just my father's. Tom, however, was not part of this new chapter. His departure from the business was final. He had burned his bridges, and I wasn't going to extend a hand to someone who had tried to take everything for himself. I realized that moving on wasn't just about letting go of the past, it was about building a future that would stand on its own, independent of the mistakes made by others. One quiet evening, after another long day of work, I found myself alone in my father's study. The room was just as he had left it, neat, organized, filled with the same books and papers that had once inspired his business decisions. I sat in his chair, staring out the window at the city skyline, lost in thought. Everything had changed. The family business was now mine, and yet, I couldn't help but feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on me. I had fought so hard to protect it, but now, it was my turn to ensure its future. I thought back to the moment when I had first discovered the backup will. I had felt so alone then, so uncertain. But now, as I looked around the room, I realized that I had built something more than just a business. I had built a foundation that would carry on my father's legacy, but also my own vision. This wasn't just about revenge or vindication. It was about creating something meaningful, something lasting. I had fought for my place, and now, I was carving out my own path. The business world was not without its challenges. Despite the success I had achieved, I knew that there were always new obstacles to overcome. The competition was fierce, and there were people who would stop at nothing to undermine me and the company I had inherited. One of the most difficult aspects was managing the expectations of the board and investors. They had always looked to my father for guidance, and now they were looking to me. I knew I had big shoes to fill, but I wasn't about to let fear dictate my actions. I quickly learned that leadership was more than just making tough decisions, it was about building relationships, earning respect, and standing firm in the face of opposition. It wasn't always easy, but I knew I was capable of handling the pressure. I surrounded myself with a trusted team, individuals who shared my vision and were willing to work toward the company's success. We faced setbacks, but with every challenge, I grew stronger, more confident. This was no longer just my father's business, it was mine. And I was determined to take it to new heights. As the business continued to thrive, I could feel my father's presence with me every step of the way. I had inherited more than just assets and investments. I had inherited his wisdom, his values, and his belief in doing things the right way. I made a point of revisiting the company's core values, ensuring that integrity remained at the forefront of every decision we made. The business wasn't just about profits, it was about creating something that would stand the test of time, something that would leave a positive impact on the world. Over the months, the company grew in new directions. We expanded into new markets, launched new products, and gained a reputation for being a company that valued its employees, its clients, and its community. It wasn't just about maintaining my father's legacy, it was about building my own. And in doing so, I realized that I had created something truly meaningful. The legacy of our family business would live on, not because of what had come before, but because of the work I was doing now. Tom, however, wasn't finished. Even though he had been removed from the company, he continued to try and undermine my efforts from the outside. He called investors, tried to tarnish the company's reputation, and even attempted to sway a few board members. His actions were petty, but they were also dangerous. Tom had always been manipulative, and I knew that he wouldn't let go of his sense of entitlement so easily. But I wasn't afraid. I had been preparing for this. I had seen his tricks before, and I wasn't going to let him destroy everything I had worked so hard to build. Each time Tom made a move, I countered it with precision. I worked with my legal team, my advisors, and my trusted partners to protect the company. And slowly, his efforts began to fail. The more he tried to undermine me, the more people saw through his lies. In the end, Tom's manipulations only made him look more desperate. He had lost the support of everyone, and his attempts to regain control were nothing more than a reflection of his failure. The months passed, and Tom's efforts to sabotage the company grew weaker. He stopped making public appearances, and the whispers of his involvement in shady business dealings began to spread. No one took him seriously anymore. His reputation was in tatters, and his influence had waned. I, on the other hand, continued to build the company, strengthening relationships with clients, employees, and investors. My success was silent but powerful. The company thrived, and I knew that I had earned my place at the helm. Tom had underestimated me. He thought he could take it all, but in the end, it was my integrity, my strength, and my vision that won. The final blow came when Tom attempted to bring a lawsuit against me, claiming that my leadership was harming the company. It was a last-ditch effort to discredit me and regain control. But this time, he was met with a swift response from my legal team. We had prepared for this, and we had evidence that would destroy his claims. The lawsuit was dismissed in a matter of days. Tom's credibility was shattered beyond repair. His legal battle had only served to highlight his desperation. He had no real case, no real evidence. He had nothing left. With that, Tom's attempt to regain control was finally over. The battle for the company was won, and I could finally breathe easy. Chapter 24, the final piece. With Tom gone from the company, and his efforts to sabotage my success in the past, I could finally find peace. The company was secure, and I had earned the respect of everyone who mattered. There were no more threats to my position, and the future looked bright. I spent the next few months working on the company's future plans, expanding into new industries, and ensuring that our mission remained clear: to do business with integrity, to honor the legacy of my father, and to build something that would last for generations. The peace I had fought for had finally arrived. And with it came a sense of satisfaction I hadn't realized I needed. In the end, I realized that the true victory wasn't just in taking control of the company, it was in how I did it. I had faced down betrayal, lies, and manipulation. I had stood firm when everything seemed lost, and I had built something that was stronger than ever. Tom had lost everything because of his own arrogance and greed. But I had gained something far more valuable, my father's legacy, my own success, and the knowledge that I had done it all the right way. As I stood in my father's office one last time, looking out over the city, I knew that this was just the beginning. The victory was mine, and the future was bright.